go back through history, it's actually a point that you can point back to here in American history where race was constructed. So the Bacon's Rebellion, I believe and do not kill me if this date is wrong, in 1619, I want to say, basically the relationship between white indentured servants and black slaves / indentured servants, there was a rebellion, an uprising. And so you had to create division to prevent the white indentured servants and the black slaves from, however you want to say it, coming together and rising up against their oppressor, who they outnumbered significantly.
Hey y'all, I'm Janae.
And I'm Theo.
And welcome back to Black Vision Network. On our channel, we like to make videos on black healthcare, education, business, and counseling in order to help our community just be the best that they can be.
Yeah, so today we're talking about critical race theory. And so critical race theory has kind of got very popular over the last few weeks in the news, with different politicians trying to remove it from school curriculum and trying to different right-wing people basically saying that the language is divisive and things of that nature. So we thought it was important basically not only to address these moves by these politicians, but also give people background on what critical race theory actually is and why it's important that we learn about it as a community. So why don't we start just there? What is the importance of critical race theory? And so we actually, when I first brought the idea to you for this video, you kind of had an interesting response. And I kind of want to touch on that, on why it's important. So why don't you tell the people what your response was when I was like, hey, let's do a video on critical race theory.
Okay, so first of all, I didn't really know what it was. I definitely heard it floating around like social media and stuff, but I didn't have an exact definition on what it was. So I was like, first of all, what it is, what is it? And then he gave me like a little explanation. And then and then I was like, why is it important? Like, why do we care? And then you got deeper into like why ignorance is not a solution. It just like reciprocates the problem, right?
Well, more specifically, I think you were like, well, why would we want to, learn about the bad stuff? I think was kind of your response. Or why would we want to talk about that negativity, kind of, is how you posed it. And so I've seen some of those perspectives kind of floating around. But basically, critical race theory, it examines the intersection between race and law and what part race plays in our everyday lives. And so while it may seem negative, it obviously talks about things that we don't really want to talk about, which is racism. But basically, my theory or thought on it is that if we don't have an idea of how we're being systematically disadvantaged, what barriers out there exist, then what will really be the need to try to attack those barriers and break them down? And basically, I boil it down to the statement of you want to know your enemy. The hardest enemy to defeat is one that you can't see or one that you don't know is there. And so basically, I look at critical race theory as an outline of who our enemy is and how our enemy is affecting us. And so we kind of want to avoid this blissful ignorance of, oh, well, slavery happened so far long ago, racism is a thing of the past, because in reality it's not. We can't allow these politicians and these right-wing people to further whitewash history. I mean, when we think about the history that we're taught in school, we pretty much only get, Martin Luther King and Harriet Tubman. And outside of that, we need to know, even though our history does not start here in America with the bad, we need to know that as well as all the good stuff.
Yeah, and I don't know, just like talking about this stuff, it always like triggers me, because I always think that the best way forward is to focus on what we're doing right and rather than what is going wrong. But in order to know what to do right, you have to realize what has been going wrong in the past. And I think it's a really big issue. Like, I would say we're kind of woke. It reminds me of that Jay-Z song. Well, not Jay-Z.
Oh, boy.
J. Cole. The J. Cole song, and he wrote it back to that one girl who like dissed him for doing something, and there was a line in there talking about like we're blessed enough to know this, so we have to treat the people like children. And so just because we're quote unquote woke enough to like realize how it's affecting us, not a lot of people realize how everyday like things like critical race theory and how it's implemented into our society affects them. So we just want to shed some light on that.
So while we keep throwing this term around, let's actually do a little bit of a surface level dive. Obviously, we want this video to promote you to go out and do some research of your own, but we'll go over a basic, surface level of what critical race theory is. So basically, as I said before, critical race theory seeks to examine the intersection between race and law. And basically what it says is that racism is a feature of the social structure that we live in here in the United States. And so, it's progressed over time. It was founded around the 1960s, 1970s, but basically it's progressed to have 6 main tenets today. And so we'll kind of go through those one by one. The first one being that race is a social construct. And so this one is very interesting to me. If you go back through history, it's actually a point that you can point back to here in American history where race was constructed. So the Bacon's Rebellion, I believe and do not kill me if this date is wrong, in 1619, I want to say, basically the relationship between white indentured servants and black slaves / indentured servants, there was a rebellion, an uprising. And so you had white indentured servants who were going through the same servitude as black slaves. And basically they looked at each other like, why are we doing this? We outnumber the slave owners, the people who are holding us in captivity. Why don't we come together and come against the white slave owners that are over us? And so basically, this is where race was constructed, where white slave owners told the indentured servants, hey, you're white. We have something together in common. You are a little bit higher on the totem pole as opposed to these black slaves, basically to create division, to prevent the white indentured servants and the black slaves from, however you want to say it, coming together and rising up against their oppressor, who they outnumbered significantly.
It just goes back, like there's so many things that happened hundreds of years ago that we are still reaping what's the opposite of benefits from? Like we're still doing it. We're still having repercussions of it in a different way.
Yep. To
this day. So, obviously it wasn't addressed back then, so we need to address it right now so we can scratch it out and, go about our lives in a better way, a more nurturing way.
Yeah, and I feel like so many of us in our lives, like I know I did up until, I did more research on that and heard about that, is we live as if race is this scientific thing that is just, that we all accept it as universal truth. But there's no really scientific background for race. It is a complete social construct for the means of dividing different people and different classes of people and creating those divisions. And so we'll go on and move to the next tenet, which is the notion that racism is ordinary. And so what that kind of means is basically that racism is present in every facet of life. So if you look at economics, social status, things that you're going through, doing a housing application, buying a car, racism is ordinary and present in all of those facets of life.
So I just have a question about that tenet. Like, are they saying like, I'm having trouble understanding critical race theory, because the first tenet was that it was a man-made thing, whatever, and the second tenet is saying that it's in all facets of life. So are they saying that is a fact, or are they saying that it should be?
No, they're not saying that it should be. Basically, it's a theory. They're trying to explain and explore the relationships between race and everyday life. And so basically from their findings, things that they argue and present is that racism is not this thing where you only experience it by that one bad apple who calls you the N-word. but rather that racism is present in all facets of life. It's an argument that they're making.
Oh, so like how a white man will get a better deal for a car at a car dealership than a black man.
Exactly.
Okay, yeah.
Gotcha. So, the third tenet is that the idea of what's called an interest convergence. And basically what this tenet says is that it's hard for systematic change to occur because racism benefits the majority.
Well, I think that's crazy because is it really a benefit? Like, will we ever know what it's like, how much more it would benefit everybody as a whole if racism did not exist? Or are we just forcing that into being? Like, I always think about that. Like, people always think it's better one way because that's how it's always been done. But
well, that's really what it is. It's people trying to enforce the status quo, right?
Yeah. And we're here to break it. Sorry. Okay. Next.
Next is intersectionality and anti-essentialism. And so basically what this says is arguing against, this is coming back against why racism exists and basically proving it wrong and why there shouldn't be racism. It's basically that people don't identify as just one thing. So for example, people would try to identify us as black, but there's a person out there who identifies as black who also identifies as gay or lesbian, who may also identify as a single mother or a single father. Like, being black or being white is not the singular thing that defines your identity.
Yeah. I always think about, like, that just makes me think because, like, when you get defined as, like, gay or you get defined as a single mother, it comes with, like, a certain set of, like, rules that people put you in. And
We'll
then,
get to
like,
that next.
oh, okay.
So the next tenet, which is actually called differential racialization, basically says that the majority or whites will attribute negative connotations or stereotypes to people of color in order to benefit their cause. And so kind of how you talked about, like, being a single mother comes with certain stereotypes or stigmas. Being black comes with certain stereotypes or stigmas. That is for the enforcement or furthering of the cause. I think a great example of that is the crack epidemic. And so when Ronald Reagan brought crack into the black community, it was basically looked as two completely different things. So in the black community, people who did crack, you were like, oh, you're a crack baby, that's a crack whore, this is a violent outbreak of drug dealers and crime in the black community. Where on the other hand, white people who were also doing what they call cocaine, not crack, this is a problem, we need to give these people help, this is an addiction that we need to cure in our community. And so basically that negative stereotype of, crack is killing the black community, they're killing each other and killing all around, further progress the cause of, hey, now we need to have a war on crime where we lock up a majority of black men in the black community.
Which benefits the majority because they get cheap labor from prison labor and then, so.
Exactly. And so then finally the last tenet is the voice of color. And basically, I really like this one. I think you said you did too. But basically, this tenet says that people of color can have their own unique experiences that other people will not understand. And so basically, I think of this as combatant to, sometimes you'll encounter a white person who will say, oh, slavery, racism, that's a thing of the past. Stop trying to blame it for us now, and things of that nature. And basically what Voice of Color says is that there are people who won't understand our experience, and they need to respect that fact. We're telling them what the truth is, and they need to respect our unique experiences.
Yeah. And then, like, even with friends, like coworkers, I'm just like, they'll be like, I can't even imagine you're being a black woman at work. That must be crazy. Like, all the box they put you in. I'm just like,
thanks for putting me in another box.
I mean, exactly. And I'm just like, it feels like they can only identify with, like, black trauma.
Yep.
And it's just like, there's a lot more to me than my blackness. Like,
Yep, and that goes to that other point about identifying as more than one thing. So it really, breaks it down in terms of the role that racism plays in our society. And of course, there's further reading, further digging you can do, but we just want to give a brief overview.
Yep.
And so now moving on, we kind of want to get back to, why it's gained popularity. So the attempt to remove it. And so in one of his final moves as president, Donald Trump signed an executive order banning diversity and inclusion training that was labeled divisive or stereotyping and things of this nature. And basically, critical race theory was one of the things included in that. And so from there is when you additionally see politicians trying to ban it from K through 12 curriculum. And they've actually done so in states like Idaho, Illinois, not Illinois.
I was about to say, wow.
Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Iowa. So a couple states, and they're moving to do so here in Texas if they haven't already, knowing Governor Abbott. But yeah. So let's kind of talk about now why it's important. So having, heard the basic tenets, what do you kind of feel about how this benefits us in terms of creating systematic change? Knowing these facts, how do you think that helps?
So me, just coming from like a all-inclusive, I can only talk from my perspective, and it always interests me to know like how people work and why they think in a certain way. And I think it's something that has been taught, whether it be subliminally or not, and it's just not on our level of awareness. And when it becomes in our awareness, we're able to pinpoint it more often. Like it's like when you're trying to get out of a depression, like, or if you are following your mood and you're really good at following your mood and being able to like pinpoint when you are about to go into like a depression or whatever.
Yep.
You realize certain thought patterns, and that's the start of certain things. And so I think a lot of people, things like critical race theory are outside their awareness, and they don't realize how it affects them.
Yep.
And I think it's just important so that when we are aware of it, we can, I'm pretty sure the people who like started it, they're completely aware of it, whether they're explicitly saying it or implicitly or whatever. But I think once we like define what it is, I think this theory is really awesome. We can start like voting on this stuff. And because like I didn't even know that about this stuff. I kind of rely on you to give me news about politics, because politics is depressing. But
it is.
But like I think it's important for us to know this stuff so that we can be aware of it and see it in our everyday life.
I think that's a great point. I mean, especially when you think about the tenets talking about race being a social construct, and that people don't just identify as one thing and respecting their story. I think those things are things that not a lot of people have an awareness of. And I think there are a lot of people who are very logical. And so if they were to hear something like that, it really would change your thinking, being open to, well, why is this way? There's no thing that says that race is a thing, or there's no thing that this person is just black. They have a wealth of experiences that causes them to react to certain situations in a different way than another person who may be black but is also this. And so I think just knowing and having an understanding of those things can completely change perspectives. I think another big thing that critical race theory does is kill this notion that racism is just bad apples. And I think it's something that, politicians and they'll try to use in the media, basically saying, oh, that cop who killed that unarmed black child, just a bad apple. Or that person who called this person the N-word is just a bad apple. No, the really pressing issue about racism in this form, in this stage, is how it systematically puts people of color in lower tiers. So racism has moved on from being in your face, beatings, lynchings, things of that nature, is much more subliminal now, and with redlining. We're going to relegate you to areas with poor housing and then gentrification, things of that nature that affect us on a level that not a lot of people are aware of. But I think back to awareness, as people gain higher consciousness of that, then it's much more easier for us to visualize and attack those things. And kind of, I guess, to wrap things up is the importance of critical race theory. I would say, lastly, is, when we're talking about the progression of racism in this country, a lot of people will say, we've made great strides and racism is a thing of the past. But if you ask me, I don't really think so. like I've said before, racism has moved to more covert ways that affect you in terms of buying a house, buying a car, whether you get this job or that job, things of that nature. And I think critical race theory really inspires deeper thinking to understand the world around you, which is something that I promote anyway. But I think it's really important to explore these relationships and how they interact with race. So like I said, ultimately, we can understand the enemy in front of us, understand the obstacles that we need to overcome. And we can't do that if we're stuck in this thinking that, we've come so far when it comes to talks of racism in this country. So yeah, that's all I have.
That's all I have too. This video, I already talked to Theo about this before, but it was kind of difficult for me to talk about situations like this where I feel like it's so negative, and I feel like, I don't know, I just hate talking about slavery. Who wants to talk about slavery? But it's a real part of our history. But I do believe that the more attention and focus you give to a subject, the more you're going to see it manifest into your real life. And so I like to focus on what we can do now that'll actually have a positive manifestation in our life. And that includes learning. Whether something makes you feel bad or good, if it makes you think really hard, it makes you think about things, makes you stop and take a moment to ponder it, you should probably keep reading it, watching it, listening to it, because it's going to challenge you and challenging your beliefs. And if you're you can't always be stuck in your same ways. If you want to grow in life, if you want to be better, if you want to be successful, you always have to get out of your comfort zone. And this video was out of my comfort zone. It was probably out of your comfort zone, but it probably made you aware of things that you didn't know you weren't aware of.
Yeah, and that's what it's all about. Just thinking about companies today in the world. We want even our politicians, our leaders, to reflect the body. Ideally that's what they say, the body that a leader or politician represents, that pool should be reflective of the pool that they're serving. And if you look, for example, at the executive level of most companies, you still have a majority of white men when they make up a smaller and smaller portion of the population each year. And so those are things where, without critical race theory examining these things, does that really pass your mind? Are you really pushing for more diversity at the top level of executive companies or from your politicians, if that's not a fact to you? So
think about it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a comment down below or something that shocked you or that we think we missed talking about. You got anything else?
No. Stay tuned. Keep following us on this journey. Let us know how we're doing and what you think about our videos and how you think we could help. Until next time, peace.